Today, I will try to step up here so that it's easier to see me over even at the back of the hall. Today, I was asked by the organizers, Josefa and the university, actually to provide some guidance in how to convert the research governance into some tangible actions. What are the things that you can do and should put in place in your university in order to actually really benefit from good research governance and make the link to increased research funding? I will stress a lot the research funding here and give examples, as I said yesterday, about European funding. This is by no means that I want to encourage you to only apply to European Commission for funding, but it's a good example, I think, of the way how to approach, how to prepare, and how to write good and successful grants, and how to get your organization in a creative and conducive environment to help your scientists to do that on a sustainable basis. I say that on a sustainable basis because as I was referring yesterday in the introduction, there are certain services inside the university that can be of great help. And that is getting the right information on time, getting the right help to fill in the forms, and getting the help to judge the quality of the proposal beyond the scientific content itself. And I will give some examples here today, but most of the practical examples I will give in the practical workshop tomorrow, and I hope many of you will be able to participate tomorrow, because tomorrow I will give actual examples of large projects where developing country partners have participated and how they have developed these proposals and how evaluators are looking on these proposals and to increase the success rate. So at that practical level, I will leave all the examples there of proposals and projects tomorrow. And here today I will focus on engaging with you in a discussion of what needs to be in place inside the university to help the scientists to get at that stage. So there's a logical framework behind this. Now what I said here in the title is really what needs to be in place at the institute and at the individual research group level. I split those two because there are certain services that could be organized locally and other services that could be organized centrally. And I hope that this will be an interactive, engaging discussion workshop, not just me lecturing. Because on one hand, we need to learn from each other. And second, I can give you some examples and questions, but it's you who need to find the best model that works here, in your context. I cannot ever dictate anything on you. That would not be just. So I have put in this presentation 5 points for real discussion to focus your contribution of what is your perception of the needs and the possibilities and the ways forward. And I hope we can capture the responses on those. They will be taped on the audio, so that will facilitate a report later, which will distribute it to each of you if you have left your email. So again, I encourage you, please leave your email in contact with Josefa Foba so that you get the results of this presentation. Don't worry about the details on the slides. All the slides and the presentation report will be available through Dr. Foba and through the project, in fact, also on our website. So you do not have to note everything down. Just think of the principles and think how to apply it in your organization. Okay, let's briefly take one step back. Why am I here and what I'm doing here and where do I come from? As was said earlier yesterday, my company is a partner in the RIMI4AC project, which is a large project made by the European Commission through the ACP Secretariat under the Science and Technology Program. And this is a project of €3 million for 3 years with 10 partners across the continent, plus the Caribbean region, to establish associations like SARIMA, KENRIMA, VARIMA, and to do capacity building in each of the universities to help them to take the next step and to grow alone. That is the broad perspective. The specific perspective, objective, I'm responsible for in that project is training. Training of workshops, designing training workshops that benefit your needs, not the off-the-shelf workshops that we have in Europe. So that is why it's so important to get your response, so that we know exactly which aspects of the training we need to encourage, we need to reinforce, and to plan in the next 3 years. So if you cannot talk to me, please give the feedback to Dr. Foba as the focal point, because this is incredibly important. Your participation from your high-level perspective, what training needs are necessary. Now, I have my own little background. I started, like many of you, as a scientist, and I did my PhD in the early 80s in the Netherlands, where I was born, on medicine and biology. I have a double background. And my own research background is in science of the brain, neuroscience. How does the brain work? How can we improve drugs that work in the brain? Very complex issue. A brain is not just a black box, like a motor. It has its own dynamics. It adapts, it learns, it changes. Now people are so as well. People adapt and change and learn. So hence there is a certain psychology to the research in the laboratory. But basically I focused on the biochemistry and neuroscience level. Then I spent a fellowship in America, and I spent 7 years at the National Institute of Health as a researcher. I spent another 4 years as a professeur de l'Université Pasteur en France. Donc oui, je parle français. Si vous avez des questions en français, pas de problème. And after 15 years of research, I switched to industry. I was accused by my colleagues, Frank, how can you? You've been publishing in PNAS and etc. You have postdoc fellows in your group. How can you leave science? I said, well, as a research director in a biotech company, I still work with science, but I focus more on the management level to create an environment for science and to make those results useful. That's also science management. So for 13 years, I've been doing that. 15 years academic, 13 years research manager. And I've been president of a European Association of Research Managers for 4 years, 6 years in the board. So the research management has become more and more important in my own life, and I would be very happy to share that with you. To make a long story short, we did sell our company to a large pharmaceutical company, and I set up 8 years ago my own company here, which is the company I represent as a partner in this larger project. So there is a corporate background and a management background as well as basic science background, and I appreciate, as I said yesterday, the cultural gap between basic science and industry and translating science and knowledge into useful concepts. So that is the core of what I do every day. Now, that leads me to the basic notion, why do we need management? Why is it so necessary? And please do not confuse management with bureaucracy. Those are two very different concepts. Same, do not confuse research with innovation. Research is discovering new things, inventions, maybe, but innovation is implementing that into an environment like society and making a change. That is very different. Those are two steps, and I will come back to that later. I've organized this whole presentation around that whole theme to enable that, to make more discoveries, to do basic science, and use that knowledge to implement and transfer it. Not one or the other, but both. And to make that connection, you need a number of functions, and you need to be aware of information that is out there. So I will start with some of the information that is useful for you directly on European funding and principles, how we operate in Europe and how we can collaborate with you. And then in the second half, I will focus on the kind of service function that you could set up in your university, and there I would have a lot of questions to you. Okay? Now, the key issues of governing research and risk we discovered briefly yesterday, but the most important thing is really, from my perspective here today, to focus on the positive aspects, not only on the negative aspects of risk, but also from why would we do this? Where is the value in this research? And you will recognize some of the slides of yesterday, just one or two. Really, as a reminder, what I said yesterday, there are certain things that you want to achieve, and particularly in a university input. In a university environment, the input is very important. And forget about the word pipeline of products here. It's really products in the broadest sense of the word. Products as knowledge, knowledgeable people, students trained, courses, publications. All of those are products of a university. So I may use corporate language here and there, but please transfer this into the kind of thing that you have as output of a university. Same thing for new markets. New markets, it remains connected to visibility. Is your university visible in Canada, in Germany, in France? If a professor in Spain immediately thinks of your university if they think of Central Africa, that is marketing in this case. And it's not only selling yourself, but maybe offering your expertise and making sure that people recognize the value that you can offer. That is not a dirty thing. It's not just sending out brochures. It's explaining the value that you have. And then, of course, what we discussed yesterday briefly, the type of thing that you would like to avoid. Everybody is complaining about old infrastructure and losing the key experts in brain drain. And if you incorporate that in your strategy plan for each project, you can avoid this. If you forget this in each project, you may end up, in spite of the money, still with old infrastructure and brain drain. So keep that as a holistic approach in your back of the mind if you're designing projects for funding. Now next, in an individual project, drilling down one level deeper, where is that value? Again, what I said yesterday. The individual products, new processes, new publications, new service, diagnostic kits, a new plant that can be used, those are the kind of things that are coming out. Sometimes also processes, methodologies, thinking in the Faculty of Arts again, or sociology or social humanities, improving your methodologies of working and engaging and surveys, those are knowledgeable things that are very tangible, okay? The thing I mentioned this morning, achieving critical mass, because if you want to link your research group to other research groups together to attract more money, the best way to do that is to link it to the grand challenges that we face in society, as we discussed this morning, in a very practical way. If you're sitting on one piece of a puzzle, and the whole puzzle is food security, or energy, or sustainable development, together you can actually maybe solve part of that problem. Nobody can solve them alone, and I will give tomorrow actual examples of doing that in larger consortia, and how to grow there. So please stay with me tomorrow for the actual cases. The reason to do this is really to use public funding from various sources, your own national government as well as international funding, to lower the risk, as I said yesterday. Now, I assumed here in my talk that we are immediately jumping to international partnerships. And I do not want to place a rosy figure here. International partnering does have requirements. Requirements at the level of processes, administration, ethics, efficiency, quality of work, high quality of expertise. As was discovered this morning, a scholar here does not automatically apply for the best scholarships in the UK. So the high quality at international standards is something that you have to prepare for. It does not come automatically. On top of that, you have language differences, cultural differences. Even within Europe, we have this huge diversity. A Swede will not react the same way as a Greek or a Portuguese or a German. Germans are very known for their extremely organized, strict, efficient frameworks, but they're less flexible. If a problem arises that has not been foreseen, they're lost. While in Italian, they'll say problem, ooh, we can make our way around this, no problem. And they solve it easily. So the best would be have a project manager from Germany and a lawyer from Italy. Now, cultural differences can really play a good role there, but be aware of them. And many Europeans are less aware of your culture, your cultural background. So be explicit. Explain what you expect. Explain why you don't understand something. Explain how you want to partner, what you want to get out. I mentioned this, I notified this week, you're very vocal, very open people here in Cameroon, and I appreciate that. That helps. Some people are very closed, and they're more difficult to work with. And then you get all kinds of assumptions underneath, and that creates problems. As I said yesterday, communication and explaining what you want to achieve are very, very important for international partnerships, much more than national projects. And then we talked about responsible partnering, and I will have a slide for you, and I would like to discuss that a little bit later in more detail. Going into the actual funding, from where do you get that money then? If you have international partners, where do you get that money? Well, there is a multitude of private organizations, public organizations, endless. There's a whole landscape. So how do you navigate there? Now, to be honest, even from Europe, we're completely lost in that labyrinth, and there are certain information sources, which I will present tomorrow, that give you a head start. But you have to find and exercise your own way to find funding there, and realize, and that is at your level, the leader's level, the most important. Address the funding agency that addresses the right level of strategy and complexity for the project. Practical example. You don't ask NIH or the WHO for a simple fellowship or for scholarship. There are many scholarships for individual fellows, and they're far easier to get. However, if you have a professor who would like to go to Europe, you can go to the European Commission funding, one of the programs funds that. If you have a larger consortium of 10 partners, like the RIMI 4AC, then you can go to a larger structure, like the European Commission or the World Bank. So, first, assemble your consortia and then select your funding, not the other way around. Quite often scientists, they see a call and they say, yes, money, I want to get money from Brussels. And then they don't think about the context, the strategy, whether they have the right elements to be successful. You first start with the problem, then you assign a consortium, and then you look for the right funding agency. And in that way, I have to warn you, the examples I will give from the Framework 7 program from the European funding is really a strategic instrument, not a starter. For an individual researcher, that is not fit. But if you have a consortium or you have European partners and you would like to build it in the long term, then the Framework 7 is a fantastic resource to connect people. But only that. So use the funding in its own right source. Sometimes funding from local governments or local individuals is far easier to get. So be critical there. So there's another context, and that is outside your university. In general, all the R&D players are facing the fact that science is a global activity, and you are competing at the top level with China, US, with Europe, anybody. You already do that as a scientist when you publish, but when you compete for money, you do the same. And publishing and competing for money are two different activities, very different. A proposal is not a scientific paper. And I will come back to that tomorrow in more detail. What are exactly the differences? The second thing is that not only the competition is global, but the challenges are global too. Think of the Millennium Development Goals. Think of the NEPAD initiatives and priorities, the national priorities you have here in Cameroon. These problems are shared with people all over the world. Think of drought, water management in arid areas. That is the same problem in Chile and in Mexico and in Spain. So if you find partners that are sitting on the same problem and together you find a solution, the applications can be in many places in the world. That is value. If you focus on something that is completely isolated, the value is limited. Second thing is that the easy problems have been solved already. And I can give you an example from my sector, health sector. The big infectious diseases, there are medications for these. The large diagnosis problems, there are kits and ways and assays for this. But the problems are if, for example, malaria, there are medication for malaria, no problem. But the problem that somebody is infected with the drug-resistant malaria, then you need very, very tough second-generation medication or third-generation medication that does not exist yet. Same for HIV. And that becomes much more complex to investigate, and you need all these disciplines to act together to find a solution. It's beyond the days of Pasteur, who found one compound that could kill the bacterium. Life is more complicated now. Same in astronomy, we are investigating the stars on the other side of the universe. You need multidisciplinary collaboration for doing that. That is exciting, but it requires more management. So there's a clear need for international cooperation. I showed you this yesterday, and the reason for this, showing this again, is actually that there is a lot of background documentation on this in Europe. Read it. All that information is free. And a good starting point will be the websites that I give you tomorrow on Cordis. Cordis is the European documentation server, where a lot of this information is out there. But also, if you're working in the health-related area, the WHO. If you're related in the astronomy area, you go to NASA and ESA. So get that information, teach your fellows that that is the level that they should think of. And then step on top of that. Don't start at the bottom. And then I come to the aspect that is very important to address real and serious money in the larger projects, and that is impact. And I was happy to see in one or two presentations yesterday, for example, the Professor Boba from Yaoundé, showing exactly what is the impact of his European project and how he can build value for others and build on top of that project in the future. Impact is incredibly important for the European projects because most projects do not fail on the scientific context. They're all scientifically very well, but they fail on impact. And I'm evaluator for the European Commission since FP5, since 12 years. And I see most of these proposals fail because they cannot actually explain where is the impact and how is the impact realized. Again, I will give examples tomorrow, but just keep that in your mind when you design larger projects. Now, as one example, I will give zip very fast through the European funding as an example of attracting funding in this framework, in this philosophy. I will go in more detail here tomorrow, but just to give you a glimpse, if you're not able to participate tomorrow, what kind of funding is out there in Europe and what it can be used for. If you go to the Cordis website, and I will give the website later, Cordis, that has a wealth of information of what is happening in Europe, and Europe is still the largest economic bloc in the world, so there's happening a lot. Much more even than in America at that level for research. And the European programs paid by the European Commission are organized in different blocks. There's a block on basic research, very high level frontier research, which is, in all honesty, reserved for the European scientists. If you have one of your scientists moving to Europe, they can address and do those kind of research there. But it's not for research here in Africa. But under the cooperation, which is by far the biggest block, there are many, many collaborative projects and programs that are completely open to each of you on an equal basis to the French and the Germans and the English. You're not second grade, you're not in a special rules, same evaluation, same review, same amount of money, same rights as any other European groups. This makes this program a bit unique and very open for your groups. So if you're up to that level, you can compete and get enter and treat it as any other European. There's also a very interesting program that is called People's Program under Marie Curie. And you will find that here in this block if you click on the hyperlink. And that is for sending fellowships. Even senior scientists and deans of faculties like yourself can actually exchange for a few weeks or months to Europe and learn and exchange methodologies and practices and policies. As long as it's linked to research and the topic of research, you define yourself. So it's a very free and open program. And there are multiple deadlines throughout the year, and all the deadlines are listed there. Again, Dr. Foba's office will have all the information in the coming months on a regular basis. And then there's one program under international cooperation that is linked there. We are talking about serious money here in Europe. We are talking about 50 billion euros over the 7-year program across all areas. And as you can see, the far biggest chunk of money is in the cooperative projects that are completely open to you. That cooperation program is divided by themes, so you can find your own topic in underneath each of these themes. However, I encourage each of you as a scientist to look into the other programs, because quite often there is a considerable overlap. Under health, for example, take the example of malaria. Malaria is a health problem, sure, but it's also an environmental problem. Malaria control, vector control, relies on proper water management, agricultural practices, and social sciences to distribute nets and education courses. All of that are needed to prevent malaria to spread in the first place. You need epidemiological studies under social sciences again. There are many angles that you can attack that problem. So the solutions can be found under health, under food agriculture, and under environment, and under socio-economic sciences. So think in those terms, and I will give more examples tomorrow. Then we go to the chunks of money. You will see that under ICT, information communication technologies, there's by far the largest amount of money, and that is a fantastic opportunity for companies here. If you have a special piece of software developed by young engineers and you're able to collaborate with companies who can bring that to the market, you develop the jobs and economic value in a very short term. Quite often you can bring these products to the market in less than a year. While in my sector in health, it takes 10 or 15 years. That's a very different ballgame. So have a look at those programs and see where you can help your scientists and your faculty in those areas. And again, keep in mind there's a big overlap. Nanomaterials under production can be useful in engineering or in building materials or in sensors or any other area. So there's a lot of overlap and interaction. Then I will skip this one. I will tell a little bit more tomorrow. There's a special program for SMEs, the small medium enterprises, that are also open for African partners if they collaborate with SMEs in Europe. And there's this international cooperation program that is running projects that are very similar to the project in which we engage here. That is training, workshops, seminars, conferences. So there's 100% funding for those activities too. Then under the People's Program, just have a look at the details there, and I will give a few examples tomorrow, but there are a couple of things that are really open for exchange of people from Africa to Europe or Europeans to be invited to work for a few months here. And that is incredibly valuable because you learn from people in their own context. And you do not learn only what the written knowledge is, but also on the know-how to do things. That is the website where you find all these calls, and it's very user-friendly. You click on Find a Call, and you find all the open calls. If you click on a hyperlink, all the documentation that is needed is behind there. So you can download, work on it offline, and then submit a proposal together with your partners. And you can also find partners, and that is something I will address tomorrow more detailed, but it's important that each of you know it for your scientists also, that this is a way to find project partners if you don't know them yet. So just give that information already now. Okay. what are the real challenges? And now we're going back to the management and governance level. If you have an idea, if you have partners and you know where to get the money, what are the challenges that need to be faced in order to be successful? Not only get the money, but also manage the programs and reap the benefits of it over the longer term and do it again and again. There are a couple of challenges that you should be aware of, and I'm sure you will recognize a number of these in practice. So much of this is rather a checklist than new knowledge. But please bear with me, because there might be new things in there. This is a very small methodology, but I see over and over again that scientists start to prepare proposals. They start with writing the proposal immediately. They have an idea and they want to do everything in themselves and write a proposal. I tried to explain it's better to start there and follow a list and do not skip any of these elements of the checklist. Quite often your partners may have the same idea. They may not want to get the same thing out of the project. And if not aligned, then you might have to. When you write a proposal, think already of the application development. Because that is, if you think how you're going to execute and close the project, it's probably the battery, no? Yeah. If you think already about what is necessary to execute, manage, and close a project and use the results yourself, then you can incorporate that into the strategy of the project and be much more successful in obtaining the funding. Many scientists forget this. They leave that to, well, whoever has some time spare. This is exactly where the research management offices and the technology transfer offices come in. They help the scientists to cover this part, which is related to creating impact. And as I said before, that is usually the weakest part of the proposal. So again, what I said yesterday, the research management offices and technology transfer office functions, even if it's one person in your university, if they are well trained in this, they can have a huge success, impact on the success rate of the proposals. And I can share with you that in the research management office we had in our organization in the past, every 100,000 euros spent on salary had a return of 2.5 million euros gained in the university by more successful proposals. 25 times. So training people in those functions is the best return on investment you can get for your university. And this is one example, but as I've been president of this European University of Research Managers, we have done a survey on this. And many universities have come up with figures like 10, 15, 20 times return on investment. So it really does pay off. I cannot emphasize that enough. Take the courage to train at least one person in your university to oversee the quality of the grants, the process, and help with this aspect of the proposal. The scientists, they can write the technical part, no problem. But this is where they usually fail. Okay? Another one. Creating a process of working together. And that is back to the management environment and the culture in your university. And as vice-chancellors, faculty deans, and leaders of laboratories, you have a very important role in creating that collaborative, open culture. I said that yesterday, and I would like to repeat it again, because it's really, really important to get here. IPR issues, which I will discuss in much more detail tomorrow, but I will touch on it in the next slides, are the key elements if you want to collaborate with European partners, even if you collaborate with university partners, not even thinking about companies. That's a different ballgame. It's not only about protection of your rights, but about capturing the value for you so that it doesn't leave the country and you're left alone next time. If you capture the value, it's a building block, and then you can use the next brick and the further brick, and then you can build a house. That's the idea about it. Projects are just building blocks, bricks. Now, IPRs are really to protect that so that the wind and the storms and the floods do not wash away those bricks, no? So having a strategy at the level of the university is incredibly important to do this. But the strategy should not be something at the political level only, a legal document. It should have a firm basis in practice, what is important in your university. And that is not that easy. You have to work and talk to the individual scientists and ask them, what are the challenges that you face every day? And which priorities in the IPR policy should we focus on first? And which are nice to have elements that we can implement later? Practical example, IPR policies about confidentiality of knowledge are high priority, usually. If you don't have that, you cannot ever talk to industry and larger universities in Europe. If you have a good record keeping and documentation in-house of what you develop, that's the second priority, quite often you start with. A priority of having a royalty scheme of X% in each industry contract, I would discourage to start with. That is something that comes in place if you're in the game of talking to a very big corporation for something, a project that runs for 5 or 10 years. The really long-term, high-end projects. So I would not start with royalties and income streams. I would start with confidentiality, talking about knowledge protection, and talking about copyrights, authorships, and patenting. If there is a possibility of patenting, establish a connection with a patent lawyer so that if there is an invention, a patent lawyer from outside can help. You don't need to hire a lawyer, but at least have the connection with those specialists. So those are important first steps to start with. And then, of course, there are other challenges. As I promised, there would be a few slides of actual challenges that I come across every time over and over again. If you talk to the scientists at the ground level and then gather the priority areas in your policy documents, you will discover that co-funding is always something coming up. Quite often there is an agency that says, I will fund your research project, fantastic idea. I will fund 85%, 50%. Okay, that's a start. Who pays the rest? Yeah, we don't have any cash. End of story. Well, there are ways around this, and good practices are to look at what are your contributions in kind, which costs are you paying already, and you calculate them into the budgets, and I will do an exercise tomorrow on that. But you have to know that, and that scientists are not immediately taken aback and say, co-funding, oh no, we can't do that. And the administration needs to know that there are ways of administering this so that they do not buff off the scientists if they come up. So it's very important to keep the relation with the accounting department, that they know that their co-funding is possible sometimes. And then try to find a solution. And not immediately say, no, we have no cash. Then there's another thing, VAT, value-added tax. Quite often in projects from the WHO, from NIH, from European Commission, the cost of a piece of equipment is refunded, but not the taxes. Who pays for the taxes? Now, there are two solutions. Either you have indirect costing that pays for some of the taxes, but then you have to negotiate at least 10 or 15% of your indirect cost, otherwise you will lose. So that is part feeding into the negotiations. Second element is that you could, if you're in the position to do that, negotiate with the government to get a tax-exempt status. Some universities or research institutes have that possibility. I cannot judge whether that is feasible here in Cameroon, but I give it as a suggestion. Some countries and governments allow this for research purposes, not for other purposes, research. There's a third possibility which I've seen in Latin America, where universities set up a fundación, a separate legal entity that captures the purchases for research projects, not for other purchases. And the research projects are administered in the accept legal entity. The legal entity has a contract with the university so that for all international projects, the university is the partner, signing authority. But the actual administration and the purchases and the money and the tax issues are dealt with by the legal entity. That's a way to deal with this on a more sustainable basis if your legal environment allows you to. And there may be other solutions, but I'll just share these two examples. So, indirect costing, tax issues, those are related to policy too. Very tangible things. HR issues. Is it easy to hire people from abroad to come and visit your laboratory or university to have for meetings for extended periods of time? Do they get support in hosting? Obtaining visa, finding lodging for more than a month, finding their way in the culture of your country. Is there a way to help and host and welcome these people in a consistent way? That makes international collaboration much more enthusiastic from the receiving end. And they will be your ambassadors. When they return back to Europe or their own country elsewhere, they will say, wow, University Boea, Uganda, they were so welcoming, they did everything for me, I want to do other projects with them. So that is also an environment that really brings in new projects in the long term. Then of course the nitty-gritty things of reporting and timesheets, like the European Commission is demanding, we give you a lot of money up front, you pay your salaries, but you have to monitor exactly who does what on this project. So you have to teach your scientists to not give a deep sigh on the timesheets, so you know, more bureaucracy. Explain them that this is necessary because the Commission is actually demanding it, otherwise they will not get paid. And give them a template, so it's easy to fill in, they don't have to think, and it becomes an automatic practice. Then it's less of a burden, they understand why, and there is not a fight about bureaucracy. Then I have not even touched about the gap between entrepreneurs and universities, and as you know, I've been working on both sides, and really the gap in cultural understanding and assumptions in industry is very different from university. Those of you who have dealt with industry or worked in industry knows that the pace is very fast. They want to have results yesterday, and they want to have tangible products that they can sell immediately to the market. Well, that is very far from practice in a scientific laboratory. So somehow you need to monitor exactly what are the expectations on both sides and who does what before you enter into negotiations. Otherwise, the negotiations will become very, very hostile. And having those discussions before entering negotiations enhances the success of useful partnerships. We're almost through a number of the slides that are going into the discussion. Josefa, yes? For some reason, this reminds me to my badge. It says resource person. I don't know what that means, but I should be the resource of a lot of more information and slides to you, which I'm happy to do. Okay. These are a checklist that I use in my own practice, really, on what are the main categories of challenges that you encounter if you work internationally with partners. And they reflect on challenges that we see in-house, in processes that are not well aligned, in communication that is not well aligned, in tools and templates that are not there, or people who don't know whether they can decide on things or not. So this is the practical reflection of the kind of discussions we had yesterday: who, what, where, How, why, who is responsible? I said already yesterday, communication, communication, communication. And yes, that is based on trust, trusting that the information you give will be used correctly, and trusting that the information is complete and not conflicting. That happens in every single organization, and the bigger the organization is, the more communication problems you will have. So try to be extremely alert to communication problems. These are usually leading to conflicts that are far more difficult to resolve later. If the communication problems can be resolved early on, almost like an infection, you kill it immediately and then there's not a problem. If you let it linger on, you will have a huge problem that can actually inhibit or paralyze the whole organization. So to you as leaders, this is really important in practice, to be alert of. Differences in management culture. As I said, in industry, there's a management culture of very concrete ideas, very concrete deadlines, very concrete outcomes. Universities sometimes can learn from that. They should not copy the same culture, but they can learn from the principles, from what are the measurable things, what are the tangible things, what do we actually want to achieve, and can we achieve it or not, instead of just letting go. And I will have a slide on that, and this morning somebody mentioned we are almost gardeners. Gardeners in our little garden, and we are struggling everyday life with the weather and with the plants that do not want to grow. And I will come back to that slide later at the end. But indeed, part of that gardening is also weeding. And communication problems and management culture problems are keeping the garden neat, organized, and clean. That is something we can learn from industry. So the management culture inside universities can be very open, welcoming, conducive, but still strict. I hope you get the difference between the two. Then different timelines between partners. Some universities, as I said, in Europe also have different cultures in terms of timelines. Certainly companies will have different timelines. Large corporate companies think in long terms, maybe years, mostly months. Small companies think in days and weeks. Universities think in, well, years. I will not exaggerate. So it's important to know that basic research does need time. Time to set up experiments, time to prepare people, to train people, to set up resources and infrastructure. Find the exact methodology to use. And only after a year or two, real results come up, and then the publications start to roll. Now, if you have funding for half a year, you will never get there. Think of a young scientist. The first 2 years are the most difficult of a young scientist, to get the first publications rolling and build a track record and partners and networks. That is something you should encourage. And then once they have a track record and they've shown that they take initiative, then they can find their own funding and be on their own and move out. And that is a principle that is now being applied in many universities in Europe. As I said, one of our partners is the European University Association, an association like ACU, about 800 research-intensive universities in Europe, and they have a lot of documentation on good practice on this. So have a look at the EUA website, because you will find a lot of guidance there. And they're very open to invite people from outside Europe to participate in working groups on good practice there. So that is free exchanging environment where you can learn and exchange a lot. I said already expectations here, especially if you work with industry, expectations from money can be very, very different. And I mentioned already royalty schemes. Well, just be aware, if one of your scientists would like to negotiate a royalty scheme on an invention in your university, be critical. It can be very good value, but it may, for many of the inventions in universities here, be more valuable to have an upfront payment and a scientist or a postdoc or some equipment paid and sign away from the royalties. Because the royalties, in theory, can amount up to millions of euros. And that is a fantastic, like, wow, big money. Well, I can tell you from practice, most of those royalties are never paid. And it's not even fair, because you as a university do first in initial inventions, and then the industry is asking you to share the risk in bringing it all the way to the market, which is not your role. So in very specific cases, royalties can be indeed valuable and good. But I will be very, very critical with these and try to negotiate things that are more immediate in the first term, at least for the biggest part of the negotiation terms. And then if you have the freedom, you can ask royalties on a lower scale later on top. If it's really, really valuable, and if it will be this blast that the company promises, even 1% royalty will give you wealth. So I've had these universities in France, for example, asking Pfizer, a big pharmaceutical company, on a laboratory drug that was not even tested in animals, and they asked 15% royalties. Outrageous. So there's some good practice to be realistic there too. If they would have asked to pay for 2 postdocs and a centrifuge, they would have gained far more money than what they have now. Actually, they lost a good part of the deal. They had only a minor part. So the negotiation skills, active help with that. Ask professionals who have done it before in Europe. There are many around, and don't enter into negotiations completely naive, because people will take advantage of you. And that is a pity, because you have a lot of valuable things that you can share. So that's about money and shares, and simple, easy contracts, small ones, sometimes deliver far more value, because the company depends more on you as a university than the huge, big dream contracts that create a lot of attention in the media. Sorry. And everything I've been sharing with you here contributes to point 5. If you understand a little bit the priorities of industry, or your university or research institute partner in Europe, because the same applies to big institutes in Europe if they want to collaborate with you. If you understand their priorities and where they come from and what they expect, then your position is much, much better, and you can actually build as an equal partnership on these. Then, of course, if you negotiate collaborations in terms of project, even if it's funded or co-funded by a large World Bank, WHO, or the Commission, you have to deliver. That's the hard part. You need to have sufficient capacity in terms of people, in terms of laboratories, in terms of resources, follow-up procedures and processes, as we discussed these days. So do not sign off on a grant that promises you 2 million euro to your institute if you cannot deliver. That would be a mistake. It's better to sign off 2 grants of 200,000 euros, build that infrastructure, and then sign on a bigger one. Thank you. And in the second instance, sign on a bigger contract later. Build it up slowly. No house is being built by starting with the roof and just one wall. And I've seen this over and over again, almost at the level of greed, trying to get the biggest contract and then be the best in the country. Is that sustainable? That is far more important question to answer. And then, of course, this relates to the organizational capacity. Who signs the contracts? Who's responsible for it? If somebody is on vacation and he's the only one who signs the contract, what do you do? Is there a second in line? If something happened with the one contract, do you have a plan B? That's why the different funding agencies are so important. To think already when you apply for one funding agency, can I reuse the same grant, the same proposal, and then apply it to another funding agency? You save a huge amount of work, and you keep the enthusiasm and the motivation of your people. So you as leaders should give that advice to your scientists, not to give up immediately after the first disappointment. And then, of course, but I said international differences. I had this wonderful example of, in a board where I was sitting together with a Swede and an Italian. And we have the differences in meeting principles. It was a project with something like 15 partners, so many other partners were there. But the conflict was between the Swede and the Italian. The Swedish guy was responsible for the financing and reporting. And knowing Swedes, they're very tacit. They don't say very much. And if they say something, it's really right on the nail. It's very important. And they assume everybody understands this is the one remark they will make. And they should follow up on that. They also have the habit to discuss everything in the meeting. And outside the meeting is private, not professional. The Italians are very different. You probably recognize that a little bit more. They say, well, first I need to trust a person, and then we discuss in the corridors, and then maybe we also discuss things in the meeting. So it's one context. There's no difference, border. And at some point in the project, the Swedish guy said, I'm the finance director, I need all the financial details yesterday. Everybody has promised, but you, Italian guy, you have not delivered the figures to me. You are not professional. And he said that in the meeting. Now the Italian director, he was a dean. He was offended. He was like exploding through the ceiling. How can he say this in public to me? I mean, there's no trust. I walk out of this partnership. I will never see this guy again. He was white hot. And then I was the coordinator sitting in between. And I had to sort of keep that consortium together. So I talked to the individual people in the corridor, and I said to the Swedish guy, you have not received anything. Could you not have asked him? No, this is meeting. I asked him in public, and he should be punished. The Italian guy said, well, I have the figures with me. I was delayed because blah, blah, blah. I have everything with me. If he would have asked me before the meeting in the corridor, I would have given it to him. That's what I mean with cultural, international differences. So these can make or break very large consortia. I can tell you, these were large projects. And then, of course, financial ethical issues. Sometimes activity and conduct of ethics is ethical in one country and not in another. Let me give you a very example that is not political. Genetically modified organisms, plants. If I talk to somebody in Mexico, and I will give the example actually tomorrow, genetically modified plants and corn are eaten in the US for decades. Nobody thinks about it as hazardous. In Mexico, they're culturing this on a huge scale because they're more protective against pest control. They grow better, they need less fertilizer, and they're more profitable for the farmer. So these plants are really beneficial for the farmers there, and nobody really cares in America, their market. It's impossible to import those goods in Europe, because the public opinion in Europe says, GMOs, that's scary, that will affect our health and our plants and our agriculture, and it will destroy life. So in the legislation in Europe, it's banned. Now, if you want to develop a genetically modified plant, you need to know where you want to do the research and where the market is. So keep away of those, be aware of those ethical constraints, and do not propose anything in a research proposal that would not be allowed by the UK government, by the German government, by the French government, because that would kill your proposal immediately. And there are experts on these issues, and the individual scientist may not be the expert on these. So connect, and that is again a service, connect the scientist with the ethical expert to have a look at the proposal and judge whether there's a problem or not before you submit. Saves you a lot of trouble. Okay, then we are talking about collaboration and timing. And we're talking about knowledge transfer from one partner to another. And I just put up this slide to make you aware that there are many ways of transferring knowledge. Transferring knowledge can be by sending people, receiving people, sending materials, sending papers, sending processes, or the more heavy industrialization and commercialization avenues. There's a whole landscape there. And as long as you link that to your mission and the resources you have, you can choose what is the best mode. So that is like a checklist for the TTO office. If you don't have a TTO office, it's your responsibility as university leaders to ask those questions. Is this the best mode of knowledge transfer, either to you or from you to somebody else? And with that, I would like to open this floor for the first round of discussion and questions. And after this slide, we can then go for a brief coffee break. And that is really, I have given you a number of discussions, possibilities, challenges, checklists, and difficulties in negotiation. But really, in this landscape, where do you see the biggest challenges? Are you familiar with anecdotes or with large projects that have failed, or are things that your university are struggling with the processes behind, related to the level of negotiating research projects with partners? So I'd like to open the floor, please. And somebody can transport the microphone, maybe.
Thank you very much, Frank. I think that was a very, very big eye-opener. I'm interested to know a bit more about the possibilities of funding that come from the European Union, the FP systems, for instance. These, as we said during the break, appear to be very difficult for us as developing countries to penetrate. You see, on the one hand, you have the NIH, a system of funding, which has become very easy because you simply find a partner in an American university, you research with them, you join together, and then the NIH funds everything very easily. But the European system seems very difficult for us, yet we want to also get involved with that and be a part of that knowledge system. Maybe a little bit more knowledge of how, as a university, and maybe as a region as well, we can penetrate that market.
Excuse me if I relay the answer to that question to the workshop tomorrow, because that is exactly the point of the workshop tomorrow, to show examples of how to get in there and learn from your partners. So I will address all the answers there tomorrow. Yes? Somebody else, related to negotiations.
From experience, I'm coming from University of Boya. I believe that the lack of the management, well, we do have a management structure, but there's a lot of limitation in the capacity. I mean, if we look at what you have presented and also from what we experience, to get in or to write a proposal and get project is, at least some people have been successful. But then the management of this project and the leadership that is needed and the support that is needed from the university management structure is a huge problem. It's so strenuous that some of us don't even feel like applying for other projects because, well, the backing. I think that maybe from this workshop, those in the management would learn, but one thing is certain: the capacity building and putting in place a proper infrastructure that can handle research, that can support, that can enable lecturers sit together, design project, sort for funding, all those kind of things. That is missing, and I think that helps, that really affects the capacity to negotiate, either way with the administration vis-a-vis the external funding. So I think that is really a central point. What you raised again, which I think would do well in the area of planning further workshop, It's actually designing project. Like you said, I think the first instinct is writing the proposal. You see a call and you jump into it. I mean, you start writing, then you read the details to see whether you have something that fits what they are requesting. But the whole idea of creating and making links, maybe another area is how to make that connection, between you, and sometimes it means an external institution. That, I think, if you could, more information will be useful. Mm-hmm. We often, that networking is something.
Networking, indeed. There are two answers to that. And sorry if I give the same answer as to Isaac. One is the kind of tips and hints and websites and strategies that I will share with you tomorrow. Examples of real projects, how people have started small with just one connection and tapped in the networks of other people and used those to build the next bigger projects, and how it can grow. So I will address that tomorrow. If you have the chance, then please do, and otherwise the presentations will be available through Dr. Foba's office later as well. Second thing is, once you have networks or partners and encourage them to brainstorm with ideas, yes, of course, the management principles may seem daunting at first start if you see all the elements that are there. But what I'm painting here are the individual facades of a house. Yeah? The roof, the sideways, the windows, the doors, the floors, everything. But even a house is not built by one person. You need special skills acting together. So it's a joint effort to do a successful project. And in the case of international project for the European Commission, you can heavily rely on your European partners, because usually they have done this many times. They've gone through the tricks, like I've done. I've been involved in 38 EU projects since FP4, and I'm acting as an evaluator for the European Commission. So I've seen a lot of things that work very well and that does not work very well. And search partners like those, knowledgeable partners who have done this, and they can teach you. And then the next time, you're much more at ease and you can take a lead yourself. And honestly, Isaac probably knows from Sarima, many Sarima partners have done exactly that. They've done one project, got invited, and after that, they got on the fly because they learned from the European partners. So let that be an encouragement, not be afraid.
Okay, I have the floor.
Yes? Sorry. I'm sorry, the flower was in front of it. Yes.
Thank you. I already had a microphone. I'll start with the last topic, because it's still on the board. There's legal and ownership issues. And specifically, you're talking about international property rights, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that is a very important issue, but it looks like you just rushed over it. I didn't hear you give any explanations on that. The comment I want to make is that in the university milieu, many lecturers, many professors do a lot of publishing. And, the first thing they do is when they write a book, they write an article, they prepare their lecture notes. The first thing is, if it's in the case of lecture notes, they give students to photocopy. In the case of articles, they send it first to a publishing house or a journal, which will be published, and then, they get credit for promotion in terms of grade. And then in terms of books, the ministry is there, the Ministry of Higher Education. You send it first to the ministry, they evaluate it, and they give you a little bit of money. But the point I want to emphasize here is that lecturers, university teachers can get a lot of money from, securing their, whether it's class notes or publications and manuscripts and everything by getting international property rights. because there's property international, there's property right, well, maybe not international, but at the level of the sub-region, we have what is called OAPI. OAPI is a French acronym which stands for Organisation de Propriété Intellectuelle, something like that. African Intellectual Property. Thank you.
It's one of the WIPO members, probably.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'm saying is that we can even, without using the international property right, we have one that is based in Cameroon where lecturers can, secure their publications before it goes to the publishing houses. It's true they have to pay a bit of money, but it's still an issue between the university and that organization, because the university can decide, to sponsor it, to sponsor the protection of that publication, and then later on, when the publisher gets the feedback, of course the university gets a percentage of it. So I think it's an issue that we'll need to. It will be good to explain to researchers and teachers so that they know its importance.
Have you been in contact with similar organizations of writers and publishers in Europe? Because they will be sitting on exactly the same problem, and they might have ideas of solution. Yes, please.
I want to comment at the very practical level. Okay. Here in Buea, maybe the colleague is present. I take that example because it's a favorite example of mine. He is a biologist. He knows how to grow fish, and he made a very good way of producing fingerlings. That's young fish, which those who want to do just even ponds around behind their houses can use and grow their own fish and have some protein that way. And he tested everything. Infection is very low, quality, survival is very good, and so on and so forth. The question was to make the next step so that we could have a factory somewhere that produces this, sells it. The guy doesn't want to stop to be a professor of biology. For him now, he is going to the next project. And we've been using that as an example of good applied research for the past 2 years. So the thing is, can we get a network, can we get the line where one can now just go there and it is continued, and then you have the feedback loop which goes back into the pocket of the lecturer. They say we should go to OAPI. There is a yellow form, there is a green one, there's a gray one,
yes,
and then when you have completed all, they get lost, and then you start all over again.
Yes.
I personally, with Professor Mbacham, who just left when he was a student in my lab, we made a very good monoclonal antibody, had extreme good properties for diagnosis, cytotoxicity, and all kinds of things. We went there to get this. Fill so many forms. In the long run, they were asking us for so much money. Okay, in the meantime, we had other researchers did other things, and we had just to hurriedly put the matter in the journal. Otherwise, we would have lost everything. So I'm saying that our difficulty here is to move from discovery to goods. And I think if this research management network will help us build those bridges, that would be very good. And the question, since this, I'm not the one giving the lecture, the question would be, what is your experience? How can we do it in our own milieu here, which is so, has so many challenges in terms of industry and so on? And is it possible for us to link to your own and not completely lose everything?
Yeah, thank you for that contribution, because this is a very generic problem that happens everywhere, to some extent in many places in Europe too. But certainly here, where you have so few role models who have done this, there are two aspects to it, and the one you said yourself already is using the network, like the association, Karima, like Remy for AC project, with all the expertise that can be found in the partnership, and ask for solutions, because other people have found these solutions already. And even I was this morning discussing with Isaac Mazonde, within Sarima in Southern Africa, there are people who can deliver training, the same kind of training that I'm giving. He was not even aware of it. So sometimes the expertise is right across the hall without knowing it. So getting connected and using the associations and projects like ours is very valuable to get immediate answers. The second thing is, of course, what was said earlier this morning, create an environment where then people can take the next step, like an incubator, close to a university or a science park with several universities shared. I can share many models with you that have been tested out in different countries, where in different ways of cooperation, actually ideas for commercialization are taken out to the market. And that should not be the mandate or the prime focus of the scientist, but he should see the return and should be involved as a scientific advisor, for example. So there are solutions to do that. And again, start small, with a small park, not start building. Like, example in Mexico, they had a government fund for innovation. They invested $10 million in science parks. They had the land, they had the buildings, and then they had no people to populate it. So try not to take that step. But it's not a matter of money alone, but primarily a matter of networks and connecting the right experts, and then you can access money and build the buildings. One last question before getting into the coffee break. Yes, please. And we'll take other questions later after the coffee then.
Talking mostly about this issue of getting research results to the field or getting new ideas to the field. There's some experience that I've seen in some institutes where they have a development trust. That the development trust has the task of taking the results that are being produced. They try to see how they can market it, get consultancies, and get it back to the university. The university, some of those institutes, they have their development trust or a commercial arm of the university that commercializes results of the university, gets those resource persons involved. And I don't know whether this is a good model for our Cameroonian university. Thank you.
I could not judge. But it's certainly one of the examples that should be maybe considered and then judged on its merits. Yes, yes. Some intermediary organization bringing people together. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll have a short coffee break and then come back for the other discussion and the slides. Thank you.